At its peak, the Han Dynasty was feeding 60 million people, roughly 1/4 of every human being alive on the planet, using zero synthetic fertilizer, zero gasoline-powered machinery, and zero crop science as we understand it today. That is not a metaphor for clever farming. That is an engineering problem of almost impossible scale, and the Chinese solved it 8 different ways, each one a specific documented response to a specific constraint. What I want to do here is go through those systems one by one, not as a history lesson, as a forensic examination, because when you look at the mechanics underneath each technique, what physical principle it was exploiting, what problem it was designed to eliminate, what you find is not primitive agriculture. What you find is a set of solutions so precisely engineered that modern agronomists are currently reverse engineering them to solve problems that synthetic chemistry has failed to crack. Let's start with the problem. China's geography is brutal. The north is cold, dry, and prone to drought. The south is wet, hilly, and floods without warning. The population was expanding faster than the arable land, and unlike Europe, where you could expand into new territory, Chinese farmers were working the same ground, generation after generation, for millennia. The soil should have died. In most places it didn't. Here's why. The first system is the one that started it all, and it begins with a politician who lost everything. Fan Li was a minister in the state of Yue. Brilliant, successful, and smart enough to disappear when his king became dangerous. Around 473 BC, he walked away from power, changed his name, and became a merchant. And somewhere along the way he wrote a document that became the world's first recorded fish farming manual. The Fish Farming Classic is just over 400 words. But those 400 words describe something that had never been written down before. A systematic method for constructing carp ponds, selecting breeding stock, controlling population ratios, timing harvests, and rotating fish out of a single body of water before it became biologically exhausted. Fan Li specified pond dimensions, just over an acre, with 9 internal islets and 8 pit features on the floor. Those weren't decorative. The islets created current breaks. The pits gave fish a cooler refuge during summer heat. The breeding population was specified by sex ratio. The stocking density was controlled by harvest timing. The engineering principle underneath this is what matters. Fan Li was managing a closed biological system. He understood, without the language of ecology, that a pond has a carrying capacity, and exceeding it collapses the population. His manual kept farmers operating below that threshold. Common carp were the chosen species because they tolerate murky water, eat detritus, breed predictably, and grow fast. This was not random. This was selection based on observed performance. For 2,000 years, this single document was the primary reference for fish farming across all of East Asia. The FAO, the United Nations food body, now lists the Qingtian rice fish system derived from this tradition among the world's globally important agricultural heritage systems. What Fan Li wrote in a single page outlived every political dynasty that came after him. But fish alone can't feed an empire. The real pressure was on the grain systems, and to understand what came next, you need to look at the land itself. The Hani people of Yunnan province began carving rice terraces into the Ailao Mountains during the Tang dynasty, around the 7th century AD. By the time the Ming dynasty was consolidating power in the 14th century, those terraces had reached a scale that is almost impossible to grasp standing in front of them. Over 16,600 acres of stepped paddy fields, cascading down slopes from 6,000 feet elevation to the valley floor, built with hand tools, wooden frames, and bodies. What makes the Hani terrace system extraordinary isn't the scale, it's the water logic. The Hani didn't just carve flat platforms into a hillside, they designed a gravity-fed hydraulic network that runs continuously without pumps, without maintenance machinery, and without any external power source. The system begins in the forested mountaintop above the terraces, which the Hani protected and maintained specifically because forests hold water. That forest feeds 174 channels, stretching over 467 miles total, which branch downward through every tier of the terraces. Each paddy field maintains its own water level through a set of hand-cut inlet and outlet notches in the earthen berm. Overflow from one terrace feeds the one below. Sediment, which carries nutrients, is distributed across every tier automatically, by gravity alone. The engineering breakthrough here is what hydrologists now call passive water distribution. There is no central control point. The system is self-regulating. A farmer adjusting a single inlet notch at the top propagates a change through every terrace below without any coordination required. And because each level floods and drains in sequence, the paddies never fully waterlog, which would kill the rice, and never fully dry out, which would crack the clay base. The terraces have been operating on this logic for 1,300 years. They were designated a UNESCO World Heritage Site in 2013, and engineers are currently studying their erosion resistance as a model for hillside agriculture under climate stress. That system fed people on vertical land. The next system fed people on impossible soil. The Han Dynasty's grain planters faced a problem that no amount of land could solve on its own. Continuous cropping destroys soil. Plant the same crop in the same field for 3 seasons and nitrogen is gone. Yields collapse. Famine follows. The Han answer to this was the alternating field system, Daishanfa, developed by the grain minister Zhao Guo during Emperor Wu's reign in the 1st century BC. Here is the exact mechanic. A field was divided into alternating furrows and ridges. Crops were planted in the furrows, which offered protection from wind and concentration of moisture. The following season, the positions were swapped. Last year's furrow became this year's ridge, and vice versa. This meant the soil that had been compacted and nutrient depleted by one season's root system was exposed, aerated, and left to recover while the adjacent strip bore the crop load. Zhao Guo layered this with crop sequencing. Winter wheat followed summer millet. Beans followed grain. The beans are the critical piece. Legumes carry nitrogen-fixing bacteria in root nodules that pull nitrogen from the atmosphere and lock it into the soil. This was not understood chemically until the 19th century, but Chinese farmers had observed the yield effect of planting beans before grain for centuries. The result was a system that could sustain continuous cultivation across the same field without chemical inputs. In southern Shandong, archaeobotanical records confirm 3 harvests per 2-year rotation cycle using exactly this logic. The Song dynasty took the biological principle further, not just planting legumes in sequence, burying them. Green manure is the practice of growing a crop specifically to kill it and plow it back into the soil. The earliest Chinese records of this technique date to the 3rd century AD, when local chronicles in Guangdong note farmers rotating rice with milk vetch, a low-growing legume, plowing the vetch under just before it's seeded, then flooding the field for rice planting. The decomposing plant material released a concentrated burst of nitrogen directly into the root zone of the next crop. Agronomists now call this a nitrogen flush. It was the most efficient non-synthetic soil amendment a pre-industrial farmer could execute. Chen Pu's 12th century farming manual on farming describes the technique in detail. If buried deep under the roots of rice seedlings, the plant material will decay and enrich the soil. Then plant beans, wheat, and vegetables to ripen and fertilize further. Chen Pu was describing what we would now call a biological nutrient cycle, the principle that every modern organic farming certification uses as its core methodology. He wrote it in the Song dynasty. But there was something else in the soil. Something that no Western agricultural tradition was doing at the same scale. Night soil, human waste, was being systematically collected, stored, composted, and applied to farmland across China from at least the Han Dynasty onward. The Book of Fan Shengzi, written in the Western Han period, documents the use of human excrement as fertilizer. By the Song Dynasty, it was the standard. By the Ming and Qing dynasties, it was classified as top-grade fertilizer. More valuable gram for gram than animal manure. The system that grew up around night soil collection is what makes this engineering rather than just farming. Cities developed dedicated canal networks specifically for transporting waste to rural fields. In Shanghai and Suzhou, licensed collectors paid city governments for the right to remove waste, purchasing access to a resource. By 1908, one Chinese businessman paid the equivalent of $31,000 in today's dollars for collection rights in a single district. In 1911, China was collecting more than 182 million tons of human manure per year nationally. The chemistry is straightforward. Human waste contains nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, the 3 macronutrients that synthetic fertilizers replicate. Chinese farmers were delivering all 3 directly to their fields at scale, at near zero cost, while simultaneously solving a sanitation problem. The long storage in ceramic containers, a standard practice before application, destroyed most pathogens through temperature and time, following the same logic that modern composting regulations require. The waste that European cities were dumping into rivers and harbors was being turned into calories. That difference in approach is a significant part of why Chinese soil remained productive, while European agricultural soils suffered progressive exhaustion across the same centuries. Now here's the part that should stop you cold. In the mid-20th century, American agronomist F.H. King traveled through China and Japan, studying these waste recycling systems. His 1911 book, Farmers of 40 Centuries, concluded that Asian night soil systems were the primary reason Asian soil had been farmed continuously for 4,000 years without collapse. His recommendations were largely ignored. Synthetic nitrogen fertilizers arrived from the Haber-Bosch process, and the organic recycling approach was abandoned in the West. Soil degradation statistics across American farmland today trace directly to that decision. That's the soil. Now for the water. Lifting water from a river to a field is a physics problem. You need energy. Before combustion engines, the options were human muscle, animal muscle, wind, or gravity. The dragon backbone water wheel, Longu Shui Che, solved this problem in the 2nd century AD using a chain pump principle that predated its European equivalent by 1,500 years. The mechanism, a long wooden trough, set at an angle between water source and field. Inside the trough, a continuous loop chain carrying flat wooden paddles. A foot pedal or hand crank at the top drives the chain. The paddles drag water up the trough and discharge it at the upper end. A single operator pedaling could lift water continuously at a height of 4 to 6 feet. Larger versions, driven by teams of workers or by oxen walking a wheel, could lift from greater depth and at higher volume. The Han Dynasty philosopher Wang Chong described the device around AD 80. By the Tang and Song dynasties, it was the standard irrigation tool across rice-growing southern China. Later versions were powered by water wheels, a flowing current turning a horizontal wheel, which drove a vertical wheel, which turned the chain. That version required no human or animal energy at all. It ran on the river that it was drawing from. The dragon backbone water wheel was still in active field use in rural China through the 20th century. Replicas are used today for demonstration in agricultural heritage sites. And then there's the oldest engineering project in this entire list, one that is still running. The Du-Jiangyan irrigation system was built in 256 BC by Li Bing, governor of the Qin state, on the Min River in Sichuan. The problem was specific. The Min River flooded catastrophically every summer, destroying crops. In dry seasons, it was insufficient. Li Bing's solution was to divide the river permanently into an inner and outer channel using an artificial island, a structure made of bamboo cages filled with rocks called a fish snout. The inner channel supplied irrigation water to the Chengdu Plain. The outer channel carried flood overflow and sediment away from the fields. The system required no dam. Instead, it used the river's own velocity and a curved deflection wall to separate water from sediment automatically. Heavier particles swing to the outer channel, lighter, cleaner water feeds the inner. Annual maintenance involved draining the inner channel each winter, clearing accumulated silt by hand, and reopening it in spring, a maintenance protocol that Li Bing designed into the original system and that was followed for 2,200 years without modification. Du-Jiangyan currently irrigates 668,700 acres of Sichuan farmland. It is still operating. There is no dam. There is no concrete. It survived the 2008 Sichuan earthquake, which destroyed modern dams in the same region. UNESCO listed it as a World Heritage Site in 2000. Every principle it uses, passive sediment separation, velocity-based flow division, flood relief through natural overflow, appears in modern hydraulic engineering textbooks as foundational theory. The last system is the one that kept all the others running across generations: seed selection and preservation. Chinese farmers maintained seed stocks across millennia through a practice that combined observational genetics with storage engineering. The core method was annual selection. Each harvest, the farmer separated the highest-yielding, most disease-resistant, largest grain specimens from the general crop. These were stored separately, kept dry in ceramic vessels, and used exclusively as the following season's seed stock. The rest of the harvest was consumed or sold. The seed stock was never eaten. Over centuries, this produced cultivated varieties, what geneticists now call land races, specifically adapted to local soil, local rainfall patterns, local pest pressure, and local taste preference. Chinese historical records document hundreds of distinct rice varieties adapted to conditions ranging from the high-altitude paddies of Yunnan to the brackish coastal fields of Fujian. A 1956 survey found 11,590 distinct grain varieties under cultivation across China. By 2014, 71.8% of those varieties had been lost, replaced by higher-yield commercial seed stock that performs in laboratory conditions but lacks the environmental resilience the land races had accumulated over 2,000 years of selection. The proof of what was lost sits in a dried pond in Liaoning province. In 1952, researchers excavating the site found ancient lotus seeds buried in sediment. The seeds had been there for approximately 1,288 years. Researchers ground the tough outer shells slightly to allow moisture penetration. The seeds germinated. They grew. A 1,300-year-old seed still contained viable genetic material because Chinese farmers understood that seed preservation was not optional. It was the system's entire memory. That knowledge, accumulated across 2,000 years of direct field observation, is now being reconstructed by agricultural scientists trying to build crop varieties that can survive the climate conditions bearing down on American farmland. The data is there. Some of it still exists in seed banks, in historical texts, in the community seed libraries that researchers in Yunnan and Sichuan are currently trying to catalog before the last farmers who remember the land races are gone. Here is what connects all 8 systems. Not one of them depended on an external input. No synthetic chemical imported from elsewhere. No fuel purchased from another source. Each system was designed to close its own loop. Waste returned to soil, soil returned to crop, water returned to field, seeds returned to the next planting. The engineering challenge was never how do we produce more. It was always how do we keep this running indefinitely on exactly what we already have. That is the question modern agriculture is now being forced to ask. And the answers that are performing best in field trials, passive water distribution, legume-based soil regeneration, integrated fish crop systems, land-race seed stocks, are the same answers. Li Bing, Fan Li, Zhao Guo, and the Han terrace builders worked out between 473 BC and the Song dynasty. So here's what I want to know from you. Which of these 8 systems surprised you the most? Because for me, it's the night soil network. The fact that an entire parallel logistics industry existed purely to move human waste from cities to farms at a scale that made the waste itself a traded commodity. Drop your answer in the comments. I want to see which one lands hardest for people who pay attention to this stuff. If this hit differently than you expected, hit the like button and share it with someone who thinks modern agriculture is the peak of human food production. This might recalibrate them. And make sure you're subscribed, because next we're going into a single ancient water system that shouldn't have worked by any law of physics we understood at the time, and yet it irrigated an entire civilization for 2,000 years without a single moving part.